In the blink of an eye, a once happy family is torn apart, and a life is violently extinguished. A horrific homicide with 15 stab wounds leaves behind a trail of confusion and shock. In a quiet community with minimal crime, this violent death shakes the very foundation of the area. The New York Police Department faces intense pressure to solve the case. But without video evidence, witnesses, or a murder weapon, the investigation is a steep climb. A closer look into the victim's life begins to unravel a disturbing story, and the computer searches discovered are chilling. With red flags emerging, the investigation leads to the realization that the individual responsible is far more sinister than anyone imagined. What could drive someone to commit such an unimaginable crime? Staten Island may often be regarded as the forgotten borough, but even in the quietest corners of New York City, the pursuit of justice never rests. This was evident in 2012 when the home of a respected and beloved schoolteacher became the scene of a shocking crime. On July 5, 2012, a call came in reporting a homicide within their jurisdiction, immediately launching an intense investigation. The NYPD's presence on Staten Island is unique compared to other boroughs, as many of its detectives and officers live within the community they protect. This close connection fosters a profound sense of duty, as the same individuals encountered in professional settings are also part of their personal lives. With deep ties to the area and years of experience dedicated to its safety, the detectives assigned to the case pursued justice with relentless determination. Within minutes, officers arrived at the Staten Island townhouse of Simeonette and Jonathan Krupe, both schoolteachers. A crowd had already gathered along the north side of the crime scene tape, as concerned neighbors looked on, eager to understand what had transpired. Investigators quickly turned their attention to the distraught 911 caller, 30-year-old Jonathan Krupe, Simeonette's husband. According to his initial statement, he had left the house around 7:30 a.m. to run errands and had not returned home throughout the day. His account would mark the beginning of a meticulous investigation into the tragic events that had unfolded inside the residence. Jonathan explained that both he and his wife were teachers on summer break. According to his account, Simeonette was still sleeping when he woke her to inform her of his plans for the day before departing. Upon returning home at approximately 1:30 p.m., Jonathan could not recall whether he had locked the door when he left, but upon entering the residence, he discovered his wife lying deceased on the ground. He immediately called 911, noting that she was alive when he departed and that the tragic change had occurred during his absence. With a preliminary time frame for the homicide established, investigators escorted Jonathan Krupe to the 122nd Precinct for further questioning. Meanwhile, detectives entered the home to examine the crime scene. Inside the residence, Simeonette Mapps was found lying on the floor, her arms spread out, with multiple stab wounds. The scene was indicative of extreme violence, suggesting attack. She was positioned at the bottom of the staircase, and nearby, a broken door gate raised further suspicions. The damage to the gate suggested that she had been pushed down the stairs, crashing through it before ultimately succumbing to her injuries in the foyer. The evidence painted a chilling picture of the events leading to her tragic death. Simeonette Mapes' body was sent for autopsy, while investigators continued their meticulous examination of the crime scene. As they walked through the house, it became evident that the residence had been completely ransacked. The level of disorder was excessive. Mattresses had been flipped, furniture overturned, suggesting a deliberate attempt to create the appearance of a burglary. For experienced detectives, the scene raised immediate suspicions. Having investigated thousands of break-ins, the chaotic state of the home appeared inconsistent with typical burglaries. There were no clear signs of forced entry, though investigators did note that the sliding glass door at the back of the house had been left slightly ajar, open by approximately 2 to 3 inches. In response, the crime scene unit conducted a thorough forensic analysis, dusting the sliding glass doors for fingerprints and swabbing the handle for potential DNA evidence. The tense atmosphere at the crime scene was soon disrupted by the arrival of Simeonette's mother, overwhelmed with grief. Having received a series of frantic phone calls from her son-in-law, Jonathan Krupe, she rushed to the home in a state of devastation. At around 1:50 p.m., Jonathan called me multiple times, she later recounted. He kept saying, Simeonette is dead. I collapsed to my knees, struggling to comprehend what I was hearing. I could barely make it down the stairs to get to my car. I just needed to be with my daughter. Her arrival added another emotional layer to the already grim investigation, as detectives continued piecing together the circumstances surrounding Simeonette's tragic death. The devastating news rippled through the family, reaching Simeonette's sibling in a moment of sheer panic. My mom called me, frantic, saying that Sissy was dead. I remember asking her to repeat herself, unable to process what she was saying, but she just kept screaming on the phone. Little John called and said something happened to Sissy. Overwhelmed, they rushed to get to the scene. I jumped in my truck and headed across the Arizona bridge, completely disoriented. I was in a daze, a fog. As I got off the exit, I realized I couldn't even remember where my daughter lived. My mind just went blank. The weight of the tragedy was setting in, as family members struggled to comprehend the unthinkable loss. As soon as she arrived at the scene, detectives stopped her from running inside to see her daughter. Desperate for answers, she pleaded to be let through, hoping against all odds that there had been some mistake, that it wasn't Simeonette. The memories of her daughter flooded her mind. Simeonette had a laugh so infectious that if you were in the room, you had no choice but to laugh along with her, even if you didn't know what was so funny. Now that laughter was gone, and the reality of an unimaginable loss began to take hold. Simeonette embraced life with boundless joy. She loved to have fun, to travel, and to dance, never hesitating to be the center of attention, even if it meant making a fool of herself just to bring laughter to those around her. She and Jonathan were known as the couple who could light up any room. Their playful energy, their shared love for singing and dancing, made them a joy to be around. Beyond their humor, they shared a common passion for education. Both had dedicated themselves to teaching. But for Simeonette, it was more than a career. It was a calling. She chose to work in low-income communities, believing it was her way of making the world a better place. I wouldn't call her a bleeding heart, her loved ones recalled, but she lived her life in service to others. Now faced with the unimaginable, one heartbreaking question remained. Who would want to hurt Simeonette? Across town, the Staten Island District Attorney's Office swiftly mobilized in response to the homicide. Unlike other boroughs, Staten Island operates under a system where prosecutors collaborate closely with law enforcement from the very beginning of an investigation. Within the first few hours, assistant district attorneys meet with the assigned detectives to assist with critical tasks such as obtaining search warrants, securing subpoenas, and interviewing witnesses. A thorough neighborhood canvass is also conducted as investigators seek out anyone who may have noticed suspicious activity in the area. As detectives work the crime scene, seasoned investigators Detective Burdick and Detective Senza turned their attention to the victim's husband. In cases involving domestic violence or homicide, the spouse is always the first person scrutinized. With that in mind, they sat down with Jonathan Krupe, prepared to dissect his account of the events leading up to his wife's tragic death. Investigators soon gathered background information on Jonathan Krupe. At 30 years old, he worked as a teacher at the School for Classics in Brooklyn, the same profession he shared with his wife, Simeonette. The couple had been pursuing their master's degrees at the College of Staten Island, with aspirations of starting a family in the future. A review of Jonathan's history revealed no prior criminal record or anything that would immediately raise suspicion. However, establishing a clear timeline was crucial. Investigators asked Jonathan to provide a detailed account of his whereabouts that morning, knowing that a precise chronology of events would serve as the foundation for the case. Detectives needed to determine where he had been, what he had done, and whether his statements aligned with the evidence being gathered at the scene. Jonathan Krupe provided investigators with a detailed account of his movements on the morning of the incident. He stated that he left his home around 7:30 a.m. and drove to the TKTS booth at Metro Tech in Brooklyn, intending to purchase Broadway tickets for their upcoming anniversary. From there, he proceeded to the School for Classics, where both he and Simeonette taught, to collect materials for their summer school sessions. After leaving the school, he went to have his car inspected and later visited a few sneaker stores. According to Jonathan, he had been texting Simeonette throughout the morning, asking her to help choose a paint color as he planned to stop at Home Depot. However, he told detectives that she never responded to any of his messages. Jonathan Krupe appeared to be very forthcoming with his answers as he spoke with investigators. At this early stage, detectives remained cautious, not wanting to be accusatory toward a man who had just lost his wife. It was far too soon to draw conclusions. But as in any homicide case, a thorough investigation was required. And as the victim's spouse, Krupe was undeniably a person of interest. Just 2 hours after his frantic 911 call, Jonathan sat inside the 122nd precinct, answering questions about his wife's murder. While it is often easy to suspect the husband in cases like this, detectives knew they had to take a comprehensive approach. Investigators began digging into Simeonette's life, speaking with family and friends and uncovering any details that could shed light on the case. Every stone needed to be turned, every aspect of her world examined, to determine the truth behind her tragic death. Across the borough, a separate team of investigators focused on gathering insight from Simeonette Maps's family. Though devastated by her loss, the family cooperated, providing detectives with background information that would help piece together a clearer picture of Simeonette and Jonathan's relationship, a story that had begun 12 years earlier. Simeonette had first met Jonathan Krupe through a mutual friend. Although they had never crossed paths before, they soon discovered that they had attended the same high school. After their first date, Simeonette returned home with excitement, telling her mother, "Oh, Mommy, hopefully he calls me back." Family members, however, recalled having initial reservations. "When I first met Jonathan, I couldn't help but wonder, why is she interested in him?" one relative admitted. As detectives delved deeper, they sought to understand the dynamic between the couple, searching for any signs of trouble that might have been hidden beneath the surface. Simeonette's family had mixed first impressions of Jonathan Krupe. The couple married in 2007, building a life together with what seemed like a promising future. To those around them, they had everything, the world at their fingertips. After their marriage in 2007, Jonathan and Simeonette both secured teaching positions at the School for Classics in Brownsville, New York. The area was known for its high crime rate, but Simeonette was deeply committed to her students and passionate about making a difference in their lives. While advancing in their careers, the couple also worked toward earning their master's degrees, taking the next steps toward a brighter future. Simeonette, in particular, had her heart set on starting a family. She had already begun collecting baby items, storing them in labeled bins marked Baby Krupe. Small trinkets and preparations filled their home, a testament to her excitement for the next chapter of their lives. Now, just 2 days before what would have been her 5th wedding anniversary, Simeonette Maps, a beloved wife, daughter, and sister, was found dead in her own home. The discovery was made by her husband, Jonathan Krupe, the very man investigators now had under scrutiny. During an extensive 3-hour interview, detectives closely observed Krupe's behavior. He showed little emotion, he wasn't crying, and his demeanor remained noticeably flat. While grief manifests differently for everyone, his reaction stood out. Despite lingering suspicions, investigators had no immediate evidence to hold him, and Jonathan was released. As detectives continued verifying his alibi and searching for inconsistencies, a separate team focused on Simeonette's family, gathering crucial details about the hours leading up to her murder. Every conversation, every movement, and every interaction in her final moments could hold the key to unraveling the truth. On July 4th, Simeonette spent the holiday as she always did, surrounded by family and friends. She and her loved ones gathered at a friend's house to celebrate, swimming, barbecuing, and enjoying the day together. "We did everything together, all the holidays," her sibling recalled. But as the evening went on, Simeonette wasn't feeling well and decided to leave the party early. Reflecting on that final moment, her loved ones struggled with the weight of what was unknowingly their last goodbye. That was it. That was the last time they ever saw her. Later that evening, after returning home, Simeonette's mother called her at 8:36 p.m. Simeonette answered, but something was wrong. She was crying. I immediately asked, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Oh no, Mommy, my throat hurts." Concerned, her mother urged her to see a doctor in the morning. I told her, "Please, Simeonette, you have to go." She reassured me, "I will, Mom." And that was the last conversation we had. As the interview continued, investigators pressed the family for any potential suspects, anyone who might have wanted to harm Simeonette, but there was no obvious answer. As the conversation with investigators came to an end, the Mapes family escorted the detective to the door. But before parting ways, one pressing question lingered. Instead of a direct answer, the detective responded with a question of their own, one about Jonathan. In that moment, instinct took over. Detectives from the 122nd Precinct on Staten Island continued their interviews with the family of murdered schoolteacher Simeonette Mapes Krupi. As they gathered insights into her life and relationships, one thing became clear. Her older brother John harbored deep suspicions about her husband Jonathan. Despite his internal conflict, John couldn't shake his unease. "I just don't like the guy. I never did. Something was off about him," he told investigators. He described Jonathan's unpredictable nature, how his mood could shift in an instant. One moment, he was extremely happy. The next, he was agitated. "I started noticing these little outbursts in him." Yet despite these concerns, Jonathan had been a part of their lives for years. "Not everything was perfect, not everything was rosy," John admitted. "But we were a family, and that included Jonathan." The idea that Jonathan could be responsible for something so horrific seemed almost unthinkable. And yet, the doubt remained. Armed with conflicting impressions of Jonathan Krupi, detectives returned to the precinct to analyze the case further. As they reviewed the crime scene, troubling inconsistencies began to surface. One glaring issue was the so-called burglary. Despite the house being ransacked, valuable items remained untouched. "There was tons of jewelry still there," one investigator noted. "Credit cards, blank checks, just sitting out on the counter. Even Simeonette's engagement ring was left untouched in the bathroom." The apparent intruder had taken the time to go through every room, every drawer, and every cabinet, yet had stolen nothing. To investigators, this wasn't a random break-in. It was beginning to look staged. Jonathan Krupi had provided detectives with a detailed timeline of his whereabouts on the morning of the murder. 2 days after the homicide, detectives set out to verify his alibi, retracing his steps and recovering surveillance footage from each location. Investigators reviewed video from the School for Classics, where both Jonathan and Simeonette taught. Footage confirmed that he arrived at 9:28 a.m., aligning with his statement. At 10:11 a.m., surveillance from Best Auto Spa captured Jonathan entering the facility. This too matched what he had told investigators. Additionally, a receipt from the auto shop confirmed that his car had been inspected, with the recorded mileage further corroborating his visit. So far, everything checked out. But detectives knew that timelines could be manipulated. With Simeonette's murder still shrouded in unanswered questions, they needed more than just timestamps. They needed undeniable proof. Detectives took their investigation a step further by cross-checking Jonathan Krupi's alibi with his car's odometer. By calculating the number of miles he had driven that morning, they hoped to identify any discrepancies. That was a significant gap. Too many miles were unaccounted for, raising questions about whether Jonathan had left something out of his timeline. To account for the missing miles, detectives revisited his story. Everything seemed to align until his final stop. "He told me he went to the Home Depot in the Charleston area of Staten Island," the investigator recalled. Now detectives needed to confirm whether that was true, or if those missing miles held the key to unraveling the case. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the Home Depot parking lot, checking the time Jonathan claimed to have been there. After repeatedly analyzing the video, one crucial detail became clear. Jonathan's vehicle never entered the lot. This revelation explained the missing miles. His car had not traveled as far as he claimed, meaning he had either misremembered his movements or deliberately lied about them. Just because someone doesn't go to a location they say they did doesn't automatically make them a murderer, one investigator noted. Maybe he just changed his mind about getting paint at Home Depot. But in a homicide investigation, inconsistencies matter. Detectives now had to determine where Jonathan actually went during that missing window of time, because his story wasn't adding up. As an investigator, one critical question emerged. Why would the husband of a homicide victim lie? Why would Jonathan Krupi claim to be somewhere he wasn't? While detectives strategized their next steps, a game-changing piece of forensic evidence arrived, one that would shift the entire course of the case. A DNA swab taken from the sliding glass door handle, which had been found slightly open, was analyzed. This detail was significant, as Jonathan had explicitly stated that all doors were locked and secured when he left that morning. If the door had been tampered with, It could indicate the intruder's point of entry. But when the forensic results came back, they didn't point to an unknown suspect. Instead, they turned the investigation on its head. Forensic evidence had introduced a surprising development in the investigation of slain schoolteacher Simeonette Mapskrupi. DNA swabs collected from the sliding glass door handle revealed Jonathan Krupi's DNA, an expected result since he lived in the home. However, the presence of an unidentified female donor raised new concerns. This was unexpected, an investigator explained. We ran the DNA sample through the database, hoping for a match, but nothing came up immediately. Now we had to figure out who this woman was and why her DNA was on that door handle. As the investigative team worked to uncover the identity of the mystery woman, Simeonette's loved ones gathered to say their final goodbyes. Her funeral, an emotional and heartbreaking moment for family and friends, served as a painful reminder of the tragedy that had shattered their lives. But for detectives, the search for justice was far from over. Simeonette Mapskrupi's funeral was a testament to the profound impact she had on those around her. Hundreds of mourners filled the space, requiring the use of 2 separate rooms to accommodate everyone. Among them were dozens of her students, at least 80, possibly more, who came to pay their respects. One by one, they shared heartfelt stories with her grieving family. It was during these moments that Simeonette's family began to realize the full extent of her kindness and generosity, acts of selflessness she never sought recognition for. One of the most touching revelations was a program she had quietly created for students who couldn't afford to attend prom. She collected donations of hundreds of gowns, ensuring every young woman had a beautiful dress to wear. She even covered the cost of tickets and helped pay for limousines, making sure no student missed out on a special night due to financial hardship. The more investigators learned about Simeonette Mapskrupi's selfless nature, the more determined they became to uncover the truth behind her tragic death. Every new detail about her life and character fueled their drive for justice. As part of their investigation, detectives sought to gather as much information as possible about both Simeonette and Jonathan. One key avenue was speaking with a school principal who had known them both for an extended period. She provided valuable insight into their professional relationship. Simeonette was the golden child at the school for classics, the principal revealed. She was beloved by staff and students alike. When she asked for Jonathan to be brought on board, the administration agreed, not because they wanted him, but because they wanted her to stay. Her words painted a clearer picture of the dynamics between the couple, offering investigators a deeper understanding of their life together, both at home and at work. Speaking with the principal, investigators uncovered yet another inconsistency in Jonathan Krupi's story. He had told the principal that he visited the school that morning to gather supplies for summer school. However, the principal found this claim suspicious, insisting that there was no need for any additional books or materials for the summer class they were scheduled to teach. Armed with this new information, detectives shifted their focus to understanding why Jonathan was really at the school that morning. Upon reviewing the school's surveillance footage in greater detail, investigators observed Jonathan entering the building carrying a green computer bag. However, as they scrutinized the footage further, a crucial question emerged. Where was the bag now? What happened to it? As investigators continued analyzing the surveillance footage, they observed Jonathan Krupi greeting a custodian before making his way up the stairs and entering a room. He remained inside for approximately 30 minutes, an amount of time that immediately raised suspicions. Detective Burdick, recognizing the potential significance of this discovery, paused the footage and made several phone calls to determine the purpose of the room. After speaking with school staff, investigators confirmed that Jonathan had entered a computer room. Further inquiries led them to the computer teacher, who was able to identify exactly which computer Jonathan had used that morning. With this revelation, investigators turned their attention to uncovering what Jonathan had accessed during his time in the room and whether it held any connection to Simeonette's murder. With a search warrant and subpoena, investigators submitted the desktop computer from the classroom to the NYPD Computer Crimes Lab for forensic analysis. Over the next few weeks, detectives expanded their investigation, also subpoenaing and seizing both Jonathan and Simeonette's school-issued laptops for further examination. As forensic specialists combed through the browsing histories of the 2 DOE-issued laptops, A stark contrast between the couple's online activities emerged. Jonathan's search history included topics such as baseball caps, hip-hop songs and lyrics, and sneakers he intended to resell, seemingly trivial interests with no apparent connection to his wife's murder. Simeonette's searches, however, painted a different picture. She had been researching topics related to starting a family, including how to have a child and in vitro fertilization. Additionally, among her searches were a few inquiries related to marriage counseling. These findings suggested a possible strain in their marriage, raising further questions about their relationship dynamics in the months leading up to Simeonette's tragic death. As detectives meticulously sifted through the digital evidence, they knew that uncovering key details from the couple's devices could provide critical insights. Analyzing computer and phone records often involved combing through thousands of data points, searching for anything that might shed light on the case. During their deep dive into Simeonette's search history, one particular Google query stood out. She had searched for a specific phone number, a number that also appeared in her mobile contacts, saved under a seemingly vague name, woman. This discovery immediately raised suspicions. Who was this unidentified woman? What was her connection to Simeonette? Investigators knew they needed to dig deeper, tracing the number to its owner and uncovering what role, if any, this person played in the events leading up to Simeonette's death. As the detectives anxiously waited at the motel, the tension was palpable. The plan was risky, but if it worked, it could provide a crucial breakthrough in the case. Right on cue, the door swung open, and in walked Miss Pumpkin, the escort linked to the mysterious phone number in Simeonette's phone. Keeping their cool, the investigators approached her carefully. They needed to gain her trust, get her talking, and most importantly, find out exactly how she was connected to Jonathan Krupe. Had he been a regular client? Had he spoken about his wife? Could she provide any insight into his state of mind leading up to Simeonette's murder? The case had taken a dark and unexpected turn. Now the detectives had to piece together whether Miss Pumpkin was just another detail in Jonathan's double life, or if she held the missing link to proving what really happened to Simeonette. With Miss Pumpkin's revelation, the case against Jonathan Krupe took a serious turn. Investigators now had evidence that not only had he been lying about his whereabouts on the morning of Simeonette's murder, but he had also been leading a double life, one that his wife may have recently discovered. The fact that he contacted Miss Pumpkin in a panic, urgently requesting to see her just hours after his wife's murder, raised a crucial question. Was he looking for an alibi, trying to establish a normal routine, or was this his way of numbing himself after committing the crime? Detectives now had a timeline discrepancy, a secret affair, and forensic evidence pointing at Jonathan. But to build a rock-solid case, they needed more. Now it was time to dig deeper, into his finances, his behavior leading up to the murder, and most importantly, whether Miss Pumpkin knew anything more that could connect him directly to the crime. The fact that Miss Pumpkin's DNA was found on the sliding glass door now raised even more pressing questions. Had she been inside the home? Was she involved in the murder? Or had she unknowingly left behind her DNA during a previous encounter? Even more alarming was the discovery that Simeonette had likely found out about the affair. Her Google search of Miss Pumpkin's number suggested she had been investigating her husband's secret life. Could confronting Jonathan about his infidelity have led to her murder? Detectives were now building a motive. Jonathan had been living a double life, one that was suddenly at risk of being exposed. If Simeonette threatened to leave him or expose his secrets, did he see no other way out? With Miss Pumpkin cooperating, the focus shifted entirely back to Jonathan Krupe. His web of lies was unraveling, and it was time to put the final pieces together. Investigators discovered that in the days leading up to her murder, Simeonette had searched the college website for a list of graduates who had received their master's degrees. Records revealed that Jonathan Krupe was not among them and had not been attending classes. To determine if she had shared this discovery with anyone, detectives spoke with her mother, Teresa Mapes. She confirmed that on July 2nd, Simeonette received a letter stating she had graduated with a 3.9 GPA. When she inquired about Jonathan's graduation status, she noted that he had not received a similar letter, raising further suspicion. According to Simeonette's mother, she had discovered that Jonathan had not earned his master's degree despite her financial support for his education. Simonette had been covering rent, car payments, and tuition, while Jonathan kept his earnings for himself. Determined to confront him, she asked her mother to keep the information from her father and brother, insisting she would handle it on her own. Teresa also shared her growing concerns about Jonathan's behavior, noting his apparent lack of emotion and his willingness to use his wife's murder to gain sympathy and receive free goods and services. Investigators uncovered a photograph Jonathan had sent to someone, holding a shoe near his mouth, boasting that it was given to him for free out of sympathy for his wife's murder. Despite this, he never once contacted authorities to inquire about the progress of the investigation. While evidence painted a picture of a neglectful husband and an unscrupulous individual, there was still no eyewitness, no murder weapon, and only circumstantial evidence. Although the case was strengthening, it was not yet conclusive enough to secure a conviction. During a follow-up search of Jonathan Krupe's home, investigators focused on a hallway closet that had previously been obstructed by Simonette's body. Upon searching inside, detectives discovered a throwaway cell phone, which corroborated his contact with Miss Pumpkin. Additionally, they recovered the missing green laptop bag containing Krupe's personal laptop. A search warrant was then requested and granted, allowing investigators to examine the computer for further evidence. As investigators awaited the search warrant, a critical piece of evidence emerged: the full autopsy report received in October. The medical examiner concluded that Simonette Mapes was murdered in the early morning hours of July 5th. With Jonathan Krupe confirming that he left home at 7:30 a.m., he had no alibi for the critical hours between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., when the crime likely occurred. This revelation further strengthened the case against him. Jonathan Krupe's carefully constructed timeline for the morning of July 5th was now irrelevant. Meanwhile, investigators confirmed that Miss Pumpkin had a solid alibi for the critical hours when Simonette was murdered. Cell phone and site records placed her elsewhere, ruling out her presence at the crime scene. This left detectives with a crucial question: how did her DNA end up on the sliding glass door? Investigators concluded that the most plausible explanation for the DNA transfer was touch DNA. Jonathan Krupe, after his encounter with Miss Pumpkin, unknowingly carried her DNA to the crime scene by touching the sliding glass door handle. Each new discovery further dismantled Jonathan's account of events. However, the most damning revelation came when forensic analysts examined his personal laptop. The findings were deeply disturbing. Investigators uncovered damning evidence on Jonathan Krupe's personal laptop. Search queries dating back months on topics such as cleaning a crime scene, NYPD forensic procedures, the effectiveness of bleach in eliminating blood, suffocation methods, and how to cut a throat. These searches aligned closely with the injuries found on Simonette Mapes Krupe, confirming that her murder had been meticulously planned. 4 months after the brutal crime, investigators had compiled a compelling case, setting the stage for prosecution with overwhelming evidence. At 6:37 a.m., investigators received a call from Detective Burdick with the long-awaited news. They were moving in to arrest Jonathan Krupe. The moment was bittersweet. Jonathan had been considered family, having lived with Simonette at her parents' home for years. The overwhelming sense of betrayal and sorrow was indescribable. Detectives arrested Krupe at his parents' house in Brooklyn, New York. When confronted, he showed no reaction. For the investigators and Simonette's loved ones, the arrest brought relief. No more uncertainty, no more unanswered questions. The truth had finally been confirmed. With Jonathan in custody, investigators briefed Simonette's family, preparing them for the unsettling details that would emerge. It was standard procedure to inform families in advance of any disturbing evidence. What they uncovered painted a shocking picture of a double life they never suspected. On the day of Simonette's murder, Jonathan had used a school computer to visit pornographic websites. Investigators also discovered that he was a frequent patron of a strip club located next to the school, so much so that he had his own reserved area due to the large amounts of money he had spent there. Additionally, the truth behind his failure to graduate was revealed. Despite Simonette paying for his education, Jonathan had never attended classes, deceiving his wife while indulging in his hidden lifestyle. Investigators uncovered the full extent of Jonathan's deception. He would drop Simonette off at college, claiming to have classes in another building, but instead, he would leave to visit prostitutes. The most shocking revelation came when they discovered that, immediately after murdering his wife, Jonathan had sought out another escort. This revelation devastated Simonette's family, filling them with both sorrow and rage as they grasped the true nature of the man they once considered family. As they prepared for trial, law enforcement meticulously pieced together the events of that tragic night. Their theory was that Simonette had confronted Jonathan about his infidelity, his failure to attend school, and her decision to leave him. Faced with exposure and rejection, he chose to silence her permanently. Jonathan then staged the crime scene and crafted an alibi in an attempt to evade justice. After his motel meeting with Miss Pumpkin, Jonathan returned home and carefully hid his computer bag and burner phone in the hallway closet. The most chilling detail was the realization that he had to step over Simonette's bloodied body to stash his belongings, a final act of calculated indifference that underscored the brutality of his crime. In June 2015, 3 years after Simonette's murder, the trial began. The defense argued that while Jonathan was an unfaithful husband, he was not a murderer. Over 5 weeks, both sides presented their cases. On July 21st, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in emotion as justice was finally served. 3 months later, Jonathan Krupe was sentenced to the maximum penalty of 25 years to life. Despite overwhelming evidence, he continued to deny any involvement. In his statement to the court, he offered no apology, no explanation, only silence in the face of the family that once supported him. Do you think justice was truly served in this case, or do you believe more could have been done? What are your thoughts on the role of digital evidence in solving modern crimes? If you found this case compelling, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Stay tuned for the next investigation. Justice never sleeps.